There's a version of you that already knows what to do. It knows the move to make, the risk to take, the opportunity to chase. But every time you get close to that decision, something tightens inside you. Your chest gets heavy. Your thoughts slow down. You hesitate. And then you retreat. Not because you're lazy, not because you're confused, but because something ancient inside you has already decided that moving forward is dangerous. Deep in your brain, older than logic, older than ambition, older than every modern dream you've ever had, there is a system designed for one purpose: survival. It doesn't care about your goals. It doesn't care about your career, your potential, or the life you think you deserve. Its only mission is to keep you alive, even if that means keeping you small, invisible, and stuck in a life that feels safe, but slowly drains you. Thousands of years ago, that system was necessary. One wrong move could mean exile from your tribe. One bad decision could mean starvation. One moment of standing out could make you a target. So your brain evolved to avoid risk, avoid attention, avoid failure, and above all, avoid anything unfamiliar. Back then, playing small kept you alive, but today that same instinct is quietly suffocating your chances of success. In the modern world, the dangers have changed, but your brain hasn't. There are no predators waiting outside your office. No tribe casting you out for speaking up in a meeting. No life-threatening consequence for chasing a bigger opportunity. And yet, your mind reacts as if there is. Every hesitation, every delay, every excuse, it feels rational on the surface. But underneath it is fear. Not just any fear, but deeply wired evolutionary fears that were never designed for the world you now live in. This is the hidden war most people never realize they're fighting. You think you're making decisions based on logic, strategy, or careful planning. But in reality, your choices are being filtered through ancient instincts that prioritize safety over growth, comfort over progress, and survival over success. And the most dangerous part? These fears don't announce themselves, they disguise themselves as being realistic, waiting for the right time, or just playing it safe. There are 7 of these evolutionary fears that quietly shape your career decisions, your risks, your confidence, and ultimately, your future. They operate in silence, influencing what you go after, what you avoid, and how far you allow yourself to go. Until you see them clearly, they will continue to control you without resistance. And by the time you realize what's happening, years may have already passed, with nothing to show but potential that was never fully used. Your brain is outdated, and that's not an insult, it's a biological fact. The system guiding your biggest life decisions today was designed for a world that no longer exists. A world of small tribes, constant danger, and brutal consequences for even the smallest mistake. Back then, survival depended on caution, conformity, and fear. Today, success demands the exact opposite. And yet your brain hasn't caught up. For over 200,000 years, human beings lived in environments where uncertainty meant death. Stepping into the unknown wasn't exciting, it was fatal. Being rejected by your tribe wasn't emotional pain, it was a death sentence. Standing out wasn't confidence, it was exposure to danger. So your brain evolved to avoid all of it. It became wired to seek safety, maintain approval, and eliminate risk at all costs. That wiring is still active inside you right now. But here's where the conflict begins. The modern world rewards behaviors that your brain is programmed to resist. Taking risks builds wealth. Standing out creates influence. Facing rejection opens doors. Speaking up leads to leadership. Everything required to move forward in your career directly contradicts the instincts designed to keep you safe. So every time you try to grow, your brain pulls you back, not because it wants you to fail, but because it thinks it's protecting you. This creates a silent internal war. One part of you wants expansion, success, recognition, and freedom. The other part, the older, more powerful part, wants predictability, safety, and control. And the more ambitious your goals become, the stronger that resistance feels. That tension you experience before making a bold decision. That hesitation before taking action. That voice telling you to wait just a little longer. That's not logic. That's your survival system activating. What makes this even more dangerous is how convincing it feels. Your brain doesn't say, "I'm afraid." Instead, it gives you reasons. Logical, believable, comfortable reasons. Now is not the right time. You need more preparation. What if it doesn't work? These thoughts feel intelligent, even responsible. But in reality, they are carefully disguised fear responses designed to keep you exactly where you are. And the longer you listen to them, the stronger they become. Opportunities start to look like threats. Growth starts to feel like danger, and slowly, without realizing it, you begin to build a life that is not based on your potential, but on your fears. A life where you stay within invisible boundaries, never crossing the line that your brain has marked as unsafe, even when that line is the very thing holding you back. To break free, you first have to recognize the pattern. You have to see that the resistance you feel is not always a warning, it is often a limitation. And until you understand the specific fears driving that resistance, you will keep mistaking self-protection for wisdom. That's why the next step is critical. Because these fears are not random, they are precise, predictable, and deeply embedded. And once you see them clearly, you can finally begin to take back control. Rejection was never just uncomfortable, it was deadly. In the ancient world, being rejected by your tribe meant losing protection, losing resources, and losing your place in the only system that kept you alive. Alone, you were exposed. No food, no shelter, no safety. So your brain evolved to treat rejection not as a social inconvenience, but as a direct threat to your survival. And even now, thousands of years later, it still reacts the same way. That's why something as simple as sending an application, pitching an idea, or reaching out to someone new can feel heavier than it should. Your heart rate increases, your mind starts calculating worst-case scenarios. You hesitate, not because the action is dangerous, but because your brain is interpreting it through an ancient lens. To your nervous system, rejection still feels like being cast out into the wild, even if the real consequence is just a no. In your career, this fear hides in plain sight. It convinces you not to apply for opportunities unless you feel 100% ready. It keeps you from speaking up in meetings even when you have something valuable to say. It stops you from networking, from asking questions, from putting yourself in positions where your abilities might be judged. And the most dangerous part? It doesn't feel like fear. It feels like caution, like being smart, like avoiding unnecessary risk. But every time you obey that instinct, you shrink your world a little more. Opportunities are not lost in dramatic moments, they are lost in silence. In the emails you never send, in the conversations you avoid, in the chances you talk yourself out of before they even begin. Over time, this creates a pattern where your life becomes defined not by what you pursue, but by what you quietly avoid. Rejection itself is rarely the thing that destroys people. It's the fear of it that does, because when you fear rejection, you pre-reject yourself. You eliminate possibilities before the world even has a chance to respond. You stay invisible to avoid pain, but in doing so, you also become invisible to opportunity. And in a world where visibility creates success, that is a silent form of self-sabotage. The truth is, rejection in the modern world does not carry the same consequences it once did. You are not being exiled. You are not losing your ability to survive. But your brain hasn't updated that information. It still sounds the alarm, still tightens your chest, still tells you to step back. And unless you learn to recognize that signal for what it really is, an outdated survival response, you will continue to obey it without question, and pay for it with missed opportunities you'll never even see. Standing out was never safe. In the ancient world, visibility could mean becoming a target by predators, by rival groups, or even by your own tribe. Being different could trigger suspicion. Being too bold could invite conflict. Survival depended on blending in, following patterns, and staying within the boundaries of what was familiar. So your brain learned a simple rule: stay unnoticed, stay alive. That rule never disappeared. It evolved into something more subtle, but just as powerful. Today it shows up when you hold back your ideas, when you downplay your achievements, when you choose silence over expression. You might call it humility. You might call it being reserved. But underneath there is a deeper force at work, an instinct telling you that visibility is dangerous. In your career, this fear quietly shapes how far you allow yourself to go. It keeps you from taking leadership roles even when you're capable. It stops you from sharing bold opinions that could set you apart. It convinces you to follow instead of lead, to fit in instead of stand out. And over time, you become comfortable being overlooked because it feels safer than being seen. But the modern world doesn't reward invisibility. It rewards presence. It rewards those who are willing to step forward, take space, and be noticed. The uncomfortable truth is that success often requires attention, and attention triggers the exact fear your brain is trying to avoid. So you end up trapped, wanting recognition but instinctively avoiding the very behavior that creates it. This is where the real damage happens. You start to shrink yourself without realizing it. You edit your personality, soften your voice, dilute your ideas, all to remain within a safe range of visibility. You become acceptable, predictable, non-threatening. But in doing so, you also become forgettable. And in a competitive world, being forgettable is a quiet form of failure. What makes this fear so dangerous is how it disguises itself. It tells you you're being low-key. It tells you you're waiting for the right moment. It tells you you don't need attention. But in reality, it's protecting you from exposure, the kind of exposure that leads to growth, influence, and opportunity. It's not humility, it's fear wearing a socially acceptable mask. And until you see that clearly, you will keep choosing comfort over visibility. You will keep blending in even when you were meant to stand out. Not because you lack the ability, but because a part of you still believes that being seen is something to fear instead of something to use. Uncertainty used to mean one thing: danger. If you didn't know what was ahead, you assumed the worst. A hidden predator, a hostile group, a fatal mistake waiting to happen. The safest option was always the known path, even if it was harder or less rewarding. Because at least it was predictable. At least it didn't threaten your survival. So your brain evolved to resist uncertainty at all costs. That instinct is still running your decisions today. Every time you consider changing careers, starting something new, or stepping into an unfamiliar path, your brain reacts as if you're walking into a life-threatening situation. It floods you with doubt, hesitation, and endless what-ifs. Not because the risk is truly dangerous, but because your mind is wired to treat the unknown as a threat that must be avoided. This is why so many people stay in situations they know are limiting, unfulfilling, even toxic. Because despite the discomfort, it is familiar, and familiarity feels safe. The predictable paycheck, the routine, the environment you already understand, these become psychological anchors. Leaving them, even for something better, feels like stepping into chaos. And your brain will always choose controlled discomfort over uncertain possibility. In your career, this fear shows up as overthinking. You analyze every option, every outcome, every possible failure until the decision itself becomes overwhelming. You wait for certainty before you act. You delay until you feel ready. But certainty never comes, because the future, by nature, cannot be predicted. So you remain in place, not because you lack ambition, but because your brain refuses to move without guarantees that don't exist. The cost of this fear is silent but devastating. While you hesitate, time moves, opportunities pass, other people take the risks you avoided and gain the rewards you were waiting for. And slowly you begin to convince yourself that you are being careful, when in reality you are being controlled. Controlled by a system that values safety over growth, even when that safety is keeping you stuck. The truth is, uncertainty is no longer the enemy it once was. It is the gateway to progress. Every meaningful step forward, every promotion, every business, every breakthrough exists on the other side of the unknown. But your brain hasn't updated that truth. It still resists, still warns, still pulls you back toward what is familiar. And unless you learn to recognize that resistance for what it is, an outdated survival mechanism, you will continue to choose certainty over possibility. You will stay where it feels safe, even if that safety is slowly costing you the life you could have built. Reputation once determined everything. In small tribes, how others saw you directly affected your survival. If you were perceived as weak, unreliable, or different in the wrong way, you could lose status. And with it, protection, access to resources, and your place in the group. Being judged negatively wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. So your brain evolved to constantly monitor how others perceive you, adjusting your behavior to maintain approval. That system is still active today, but the environment has changed. You are no longer dependent on a small group for survival, yet your mind still acts as if you are. Every decision passes through an invisible filter. What will people think? And that question quietly shapes your choices more than you realize. Not just in social situations, but in your career, your ambitions, and the direction of your life. This fear shows up in subtle but powerful ways. You hesitate to pursue paths that don't align with expectations. You choose careers that are acceptable instead of meaningful. You avoid making bold moves because they might attract criticism. You silence ideas not because they lack value, but because they might be misunderstood. And over time, your life begins to reflect other people's opinions more than your own intentions. The most dangerous part is how normal this feels. Seeking approval is often seen as responsible, respectful, even necessary. But when it begins to control your decisions, it becomes a prison. You start living carefully, measuring your actions against imagined reactions, constantly adjusting yourself to fit into a standard that may not even exist. And in doing so, you lose something essential: your ability to act freely. In your career, this fear can be devastating. It keeps you in roles that impress others but don't fulfill you. It stops you from taking unconventional paths that could lead to greater success. It prevents you from expressing originality, the very thing that separates average from exceptional. Because originality attracts attention, and attention invites judgment. The one thing your brain is trying to avoid. But here's the reality your brain refuses to accept. Social judgment is no longer a threat to your survival. You can be criticized and still succeed. You can be misunderstood and still move forward. The consequences your mind is trying to protect you from are no longer fatal. They are simply uncomfortable. And discomfort is not danger, no matter how convincing it feels. Until you understand that, you will continue to live within invisible limits. Limits defined not by your potential, but by your fear of how others might react to it. You will shape your life to fit expectations that were never yours to begin with. And without realizing it, you will trade authenticity for approval, a trade that slowly distances you from the success you're capable of achieving. Failure once came with real consequences. If you failed to hunt, you didn't eat. If you failed to read danger, you didn't survive. Mistakes weren't lessons, they were liabilities. So your brain evolved to avoid failure at all costs, building systems of caution, hesitation, and control. It learned to associate failure not with growth, but with loss, and sometimes with death. That ancient association still shapes how you respond to challenges today. Even when the stakes are no longer life-threatening, your brain reacts as if they are. The idea of failing, of being seen as incompetent, unprepared, or not good enough, triggers a deep internal resistance. You feel tension, pressure, and an almost instinctive urge to avoid the situation entirely. Not because you can't handle it, but because your mind is trying to protect you from perceived danger. This is where failure transforms into something more dangerous than the event itself. It becomes anticipation. You start imagining outcomes before they happen. You picture things going wrong, people judging you, opportunities collapsing. And instead of taking action, you delay. You wait. You prepare endlessly. What looks like discipline on the surface is often disguised avoidance. Because as long as you don't act, you can't fail. In your career, this fear is one of the most powerful forces holding you back. It creates perfectionism, the need to get everything right before you begin. It fuels procrastination, the habit of postponing action until the right moment appears. It convinces you to stay in planning mode, researching, organizing, thinking, but never executing. And over time, this pattern becomes a cycle. The more you delay, the more pressure builds and the more failure feels inevitable. The cost is not just missed opportunities, it's lost momentum. Success is built through repeated action, through trial, error, and adjustment. But when failure is something you're trying to avoid, you remove yourself from the very process that creates progress. You remain stuck in a state of potential, never fully stepping into reality. And the longer you stay there, the harder it becomes to move. What makes this fear so effective is how rational it sounds. It tells you to be careful, to be prepared, to avoid mistakes. And those things in moderation are useful. But when they become excuses for inaction, they turn into barriers. Barriers that feel justified, even intelligent, but ultimately keep you from advancing. The truth your brain resists is simple. Failure is no longer the end. It is part of the path. The modern world rewards those who can adapt, learn, and move forward despite mistakes. But your mind is still trying to avoid the experience entirely. And until you recognize that pattern, you will continue to delay the very actions that could move your life forward. All in the name of avoiding something that is no longer truly dangerous. Conflict was never just uncomfortable. It was risky. In the ancient world, confrontation could lead to injury, retaliation, or exile. A wrong move, a wrong word, or a challenge to the wrong person could escalate into something you might not survive. So your brain evolved to avoid conflict whenever possible, choosing peace over risk, silence over confrontation, submission over resistance. That instinct is still deeply embedded in how you operate today. Even in environments where conflict is no longer life-threatening, your body reacts as if it is. Your heart tightens, your voice softens. You hesitate to push back, to disagree, to demand more. Not because you don't have the right, but because your brain is trying to keep you safe from a threat that no longer exists in the same way. In your career, this fear quietly shapes how others perceive and treat you. You avoid difficult conversations. You don't negotiate your salary. You accept responsibilities without questioning them. You say yes when you want to say no. And over time, this creates a pattern, one where people begin to see you as agreeable, compliant, easy to manage. Not because that's who you truly are, but because that's the version of you your fear allows to exist. The danger here is subtle but powerful. When you avoid conflict, you don't just avoid tension. You avoid growth. You avoid setting boundaries. You avoid asserting your value. You avoid positioning yourself as someone who cannot be overlooked. And in environments where competition exists, those who avoid conflict often get pushed aside by those who are willing to engage with it. What makes this fear so difficult to recognize is that it often disguises itself as kindness or professionalism. You tell yourself you're being respectful, that you're keeping the peace, that you're choosing maturity over confrontation. And sometimes that's true. But when it becomes a default response, when you consistently silence yourself to avoid discomfort, it stops being strength and starts becoming self-suppression. The modern world does not operate on the same rules your brain was designed for. Conflict, when handled correctly, is not destruction. It is negotiation. It is clarity. It is positioning. It is how value is communicated and recognized. Avoiding it doesn't make you safe. It makes you invisible in situations where visibility matters. And the longer you avoid it, the more it costs you. Opportunities slip away, not because you weren't capable, but because you never asserted yourself. Your value remains unspoken, unclaimed, and ultimately unrewarded. Not because the world ignored you, but because a part of you refused to step into the tension required to be seen. Until you understand that conflict is no longer a threat, but a tool, you will continue to retreat from the very moments that define your growth. You will choose temporary comfort over long-term respect, and slowly, without realizing it, allow others to decide your worth for you. Security once meant survival. Having consistent access to food, shelter, and protection wasn't a luxury. It was the difference between life and death. Any disruption to that stability was a serious threat. So your brain evolved to hold on tightly to anything that felt secure, resisting change even when better opportunities existed. Because in a world of constant danger, stability was everything. That instinct still controls how you make decisions today. The moment your sense of security is challenged, your income, your routine, your environment, your brain reacts instantly. It floods you with fear, doubt, and worst-case scenarios. Not because the situation is truly dangerous, but because your mind is wired to treat any loss of stability as a threat to your survival. Even when the real risk is minimal, the emotional response feels overwhelming. In your career, this fear becomes one of the most powerful forces keeping you in place. It convinces you to stay in jobs that drain you, environments that limit you, and paths that no longer align with who you are. You tell yourself it's the safe choice, that stability matters more than uncertainty, that it's better to hold on to what you have than risk losing it. even if what you have is slowly holding you back. This is how people become trapped in lives they never intended to live. Not because they lack ambition, but because the fear of losing what is familiar outweighs the desire to gain something better. The steady paycheck becomes a psychological anchor. The routine becomes a comfort zone. And over time, that comfort turns into a cage, one that feels secure but quietly limits your growth. What makes this fear so dangerous is how justified it feels. Wanting stability is not wrong. Protecting yourself is not a weakness. But when that need for security becomes absolute, when it prevents you from taking any meaningful risk, it stops being protection and starts becoming restriction. You begin to prioritize short-term comfort over long-term potential, choosing what feels safe now over what could transform your future. The reality your brain struggles to accept is that true security no longer comes from staying in one place. In the modern world, security is built through adaptability, growth, and the ability to move when necessary. Holding on too tightly to stability can actually make you more vulnerable, not less. Because when change eventually comes, and it always does, you may find yourself unprepared to respond. Until you recognize this pattern, you will continue to protect what you have at the expense of what you could become. You will remain in situations that feel secure on the surface but limit you beneath it. And slowly, without realizing it, you will trade growth for comfort. Not because you chose to stay, but because a part of you was too afraid to leave. By now, the pattern is clear. These fears are not random. They are not weaknesses. They are not even personal. They are inherited systems, ancient survival programs running silently beneath your awareness, shaping your decisions long before logic ever gets involved. And the most dangerous part is not that they exist, but that most people never realize they are being controlled by them. Because once you don't see it, you obey it. You call it being careful. You call it thinking things through. You call it waiting for the right time. But in reality, you are responding to signals that were never designed for the world you live in today. Signals that prioritize safety over growth, comfort over expansion, and survival over success. And if left unchecked, they will continue to guide your life in a direction that feels secure, but limits everything you are capable of becoming. Breaking free does not mean eliminating these fears. That is not possible. They are part of your biology. They will always be there, reacting, warning, pulling you back. But what changes everything is awareness. The moment you can recognize a fear as a programmed response, not a rational truth, you create space between the signal and your action. And in that space, you regain control. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin to question the feeling. You start to see hesitation for what it really is. Not a sign to stop, but a sign that you are approaching something important. The discomfort you feel before taking a risk, before speaking up, before stepping forward, is no longer a warning of danger. It becomes an indicator of growth, a signal that you are moving beyond the limits your brain has set for you. But awareness alone is not enough. You have to act against the pattern. Slowly, deliberately, repeatedly. You apply for the opportunity even when you feel unready. You speak even when your voice feels uncertain. You take the step even when the outcome is unclear. Each action sends a new message to your brain that the threat it perceives is not real. And over time, that message begins to weaken the hold these fears have over you. This is how control shifts, not in one moment, but through repeated defiance of outdated instincts. Through choosing growth when your mind demands safety. Through moving forward while your brain tells you to stay still. And the more you do this, the more your identity begins to change, from someone who is controlled by fear to someone who can act in spite of it. Because the truth is, the life you want will always exist outside the boundaries your fears are trying to enforce. Those boundaries were built for a different world. A world where staying small meant staying alive. But in the world you live in now, staying small comes at a different cost. The cost of unrealized potential, missed opportunities, and a version of your life that never fully unfolds. And once you see that clearly, the choice becomes unavoidable. You either continue to live within the limits of instincts that were never meant for this world, or you step beyond them, knowing that the fear will still be there, but it no longer gets to decide what you do next. There is a quiet truth most people will never confront. The biggest limitations in their lives are not external, not the economy, not competition, not lack of opportunity, but invisible patterns running beneath their awareness, shaping every decision they make. Patterns that feel like instinct, feel like logic, feel like protections, but are actually holding them in place. You've seen it now. The hesitation before action, the need for approval, the avoidance of risk, the silence in moments that demand expression. These are not random behaviors, they are predictable, they are programmed, and most importantly, they can be understood. Because once you understand the system, you stop being controlled by it. This is where everything begins to change. Not overnight, not instantly, but the moment you start seeing your fears for what they are, ancient signals, not modern truths, you begin to operate differently. You pause before obeying them. You question their authority. You act even when they tell you not to. And in that shift, you take back control of your direction, your decisions, and ultimately, your life. But this is only the surface. Human behavior goes deeper than what most people are willing to explore. The patterns that control attraction, power, influence, discipline, identity, these are systems most people live inside without ever understanding. And that's where the real advantage lies. Not just in knowing what to do, but in understanding why you do it and how to change it. That's what the Behavior Lab is built for. This is not just a channel. It's a place where human behavior is exposed, broken down, and understood at a level most people never reach. Where you begin to see through the illusions of your own mind and understand the hidden forces shaping not just your career, but every part of your life. If you're ready to go deeper, subscribe. Because in the next videos, we're going to break down the psychology of power, attraction, discipline, and the hidden behaviors that separate those who stay stuck from those who take control. And before you leave, look at your own life for a moment. Not the version you explain to others, but the one you know is real. Which of these fears is controlling you right now? Which one has been quietly shaping your decisions without you noticing? Because the moment you can name it is the moment it starts losing its power.